dynamic. I'm your host, Tess Brigham. So let's start cleaning up this Gen mess. So for today's first solo episode, we're diving into something that's near and dear to my heart, the generations. Today, I want to talk about how I see the generations, why I use it as a framework for how I work with people and how I see people and so on, why this is such a fascinating topic for myself and so many other people. I want to talk about who's in the workforce, which generations are in the workforce right now, and then get into some common similarities and differences and talk a little bit about why. Why should you learn about the generations? What's the importance of all of this? And so the most important piece of all of this to remember is that when you think about the generations, it's a framework. It's a way of understanding the world, not just the individual, but the individual as part of this collective experience, right? So the time in which you were born, that does impact so much of how you see yourself and see the world. It shapes your values, your worldview, your choices, and it shapes the path that you take in life. So before we get into more of that nitty gritty about the generations, let's break down who's in the workforce right now. So the oldest generation in the workforce right now are baby boomers. A lot has been talked about and written about them, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but baby boomers are born between 1946 and 1964. The name came from this post-baby boom. They're a huge generation, 80 million total. They were raised by the silent generation, and a lot of their parents survived not only World War II, but their parents also were part of the Depression, and just they've been through a lot. So there was a real focus on work ethic and loyalty and stability. And that's the thing. At that time, when baby boomers were entering the world of work had a lot of those things that people were looking for. People would stay at the same job. There was a lot of value in working your way up the corporate ladder. And there were certain guarantees that you had right away. My guess would be, if you're a baby boomer out there, my guess is when you started your first job, you probably felt like at some point I'm going to be able to retire, and at some point I'm going to be able to own a home. And that's very different for the current generation. So next is Gen X. This is my generation. We were born roughly between 1965 and 1980. We are often the forgotten generation because we're sandwiched between boomers and millennials are also a very large generation. And, the joke that I always make is Gen X raised on hose water and neglect, that we were very much this feral generation where our parents, this was a generation, there was a lot more divorce. Mothers, especially, were going back to work. We were latchkey kids. And so we really value balance and personal responsibility. And, we're a bit more tech savvy than boomers because we grew up with computers and the internet was introduced when we were in our 20s and such. But we're still we still are technologically challenged. I will say that much about myself. So next it was millennials. So millennials were born between 1981 and 1996. They survived, for them, 9/11 was a big part of their childhood. They were the ones that were watching the towers fall over and over again at a young age. They watched the rise of social media. They survived the Great Recession. A lot of them had kids during the pandemic, little kids. So millennials, I often say, are the hardest working of all the generations because they came of age when not only did everyone have a platform to criticize young people, so they got so much criticism, so much judgment, so much more than they ever really deserved, but they also were the first generation that came into the workforce when everyone could work all the time. Right? They entered the workforce with bosses emailing them on the weekends and texting them. And, you're at home and you can check your email, right? A lot of stuff that I did not have to deal with in my 20s that a lot of millennials had to deal with right out of the gate. And for them, what's happened, and this is what I've seen, is it's a generation that really struggles with boundaries, struggles with being able to set time for themselves and work time because it's been so enmeshed. They've had a certain amount of freedom that, I didn't have, but the flip side is that they have been working nonstop. And they were highly criticized because it was the first time everyone had Twitter. Everyone had a way of expressing how much they hated young people when millennials came about, when they entered the workforce, which isn't fair. We've been criticizing young people since the beginning of time. That's not new. None of this is new. Just unfortunately, that was the generation that was young at that time. So Gen Z, born between 1997 and 2012, this is the first generation of true digital natives. They are the first. So they grew up with social media. They grew up with these phones. They grew up with the internet. They have no sense of what life was like before any of this, any of it, right? So they are a really fascinating generation, because I often say they're incredibly observant, and they watch, and they've been watching things that are going on. They've been watching, millennials get these very overpriced educations, but only to be in a tremendous amount of debt at 22, 23 years old, with no guarantee that the degree is even going to do anything for them, or help them, pay all that back. They watched their parents during the 2008 recession struggle and get laid off. They've been watching the criticism that millennials have gotten. They've been watching how, millennials are being blamed for too much avocado toast and lattes, and that's why they can't own a home, right? They are coming into the workforce questioning our old systems and trying to create a new way of thinking, which is exactly what young people are always, that's what they're supposed to do. But what they really want is they're bringing new expectations. They want flexible work. They want a greater focus on mental health. They don't want work to be their entire life and the thing that defines them, because they have been seeing everyone around them work incredibly hard to not have a home or retirement or, security or safety. And they're kind of going, hey, well, if I'm not going to have these things, then I need to go and enjoy my life. So how did we get these names? How did all of this come about? It was not created by sociologists or governments. It's actually advertising. Advertising first came up with baby boomer because of the spike in births after World War II. And marketers kind of took it on, right? It was a way for media and marketers to label and market to a group of people with this shared experience. Gen X actually came from a book called Gen X by Douglas Coupland, which was in 1991. Millennials, that term was actually coined by William Strauss and Neil Howe in their book Generations, that also came out in 1991. And it's Generations, it's quite a book. It is really, I'm still trying to get through it myself. But what's interesting about that book is they actually didn't even have a name for Gen X. They called it the 13th, because we were the 13th generation to come about. So why do generations matter? So as I mentioned before, the time when you're born, it influences your economic opportunities, it influences your career trajectory, and it influences your world view. So for example, if you think about millennials, and I've said very many things about them, but here's a great example of that. Millennials who graduated in 2008, 2009, 2010, they entered the job market when the economy was in a rough spot. So for them, they started their careers and work in a really tough spot, in a bit of a deficit. They, many of my clients that I've worked with who graduated around this time, they went to grad school right away, many times maybe doing something that they didn't necessarily, wasn't their first choice, but it seemed like the only thing they could do. I had other clients who really struggled to find that first job. And so even now, even though they're, 15 years into their career, they're still insecure about losing a job. Many of them, right, like knew what they wanted to do, but because there was no opportunities to do that thing, they felt like they're 4 or 5 years behind other people. And so that is very different than millennials who graduated in 2015, 2016, right? Those people graduated into a different world. The economy had stabilized. Social media was booming. Opportunities looked different. So that's the thing, is that we are born at these times, and depending on what's going on in the world, that shapes how we see things. And that shapes how we see our place in the world. And it shapes how we see work. And it shapes how we're going to think about work and think about our careers. And so this is what's happening in the workforce right now. Never before have we had so many generations in the workforce. And it's going to be like this for a while. because everyone's living longer. It's getting harder and harder to retire. So people are working a lot longer. That's just kind of how it's going to be. So we are always going to have many different generations in the workforce. And it's important for the generations to understand each other and to get along, simply because that's what makes work so much easier for everybody else if they did. But the other piece of it too is that it's important that for people to understand each other, understand their similarities, understand their differences, understand that, like, hey, yeah, because you were born at this time, or because these were the norms of our culture at this time, or because of these things over here, this is how you see the world. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't change your perspective, or that once you're in that baby boomer box, you're a baby boomer and everything that you think and say is just exactly like how baby boomers think and say it. It's like, no, that's not at all what I'm talking about. What I'm really talking about is just it creates a framework or an understanding of how to see someone, or how to understand what their experiences are. And that's really what happened for me when I first started working with young people. It was millennials at first. And in order for me to understand my clients, I really had to understand, because they were saying things to me that I didn't get. I'm like, they were stressed out about things like, oh my God, I saw my ex on Facebook, and just stuff that I never had to deal with when I was in my 20s. But all of a sudden, I had all these 20 somethings coming to see me, and I had to understand them and understand how their experiences, how their life experiences were similar to mine and how they were different than mine, so that I can then start working with them and understand what they needed. And that's what I found to be incredibly helpful. So let's talk a little bit about similarities and differences. So this is also very, very important, because at the core, our similarities are all the same. We are people. We are guided by the same biology that everyone is, no matter when you're born, because our biology rules all. So that's the most important piece, is that no matter what it is, we are creatures that are very much wired for survival, and that's always what we're going to go to. So everybody wants job stability, everyone wants fair pay, everyone wants work-life balance, everyone wants bonuses, everyone wants, and regardless of age, the other thing that everyone wants is to be valued, to be respected, and to be appreciated. End of story. So at the core, right, we are all people. We all need to feel safe and secure, and we all need to feel accepted. These are two giant things. These are the two biggest things that kind of are rooted in how we are as people, our biology, right? We're rooted for survival and connection. The differences are that, as I was saying earlier, right, the differences are the work expectations. Boomers came into the workforce with this concept of paying your dues. But millennials and Gen Z, they don't see it like paying their dues, because, things have moved a lot faster for them. They're used to technology. They're used to getting likes right away. They're used to that, right? Communication styles are different, because when you grow up using digital devices, that's what feels comfortable to you. That's what you're going to go to. That's what you're going to lean on. Just as older generations, right, we are far more comfortable with face-to-face and phones and, right, other things like that, because that's what we know and that's our experience. Right. And these same things, they then influence, right, this belief around hierarchy and loyalty and feedback and mentorship and all of these concepts that are talked about in the workforce. How you were raised, how the opportunities that you were given, all of those things, that will influence your leadership style, your feedback, your ability to adopt tech, work-life balance, right? All of these things. So I really want to emphasize that when I talk about the generations, I'm not saying that everyone is exactly the same. And I'm not saying that every millennial is entitled and every Gen Zer is lazy and that every, baby boomer is like stuck in the past. That's not at all. That's not at all what's happening at all. These labels are really there to just kind of help us better understand. So, because here's the thing, and this is the most important piece of all of this. When we understand someone's background, when we understand what drives them and what motivates them, we can empathize with them. And when we empathize with someone, we connect. And connection is key. connection is always key. We need connection. We are connected creatures. We need each other. So in order to have that connection to feel authentic, right? We have to really understand and empathize with that person. And the thing about empathy is not agreement. Empathy is not like, oh, you're absolutely right. What empathy is I can put myself in your perspective. I can see what your experience is like, and I can see how this is why you may have reacted this way. Doesn't mean that's how you would have reacted. Doesn't mean it's the right way to react or the wrong way to react. It doesn't mean any of that. It's not agreement. It just means that you can understand that. And once we can understand that, wow, so much can happen, right? So these are when I talk about the generations, these are big picture observations. They're not hard and fast rules. It's important. We need to approach each person as an individual, right? Someone who had been shaped by the time they were born, but isn't defined by it, right? So here's my takeaway from you for all of you, right? Generations, they give us a lens to understand each other better. It's not about pigeonholing people. It's about offering context and helping us understand the motivations behind someone's actions. The more we understand, the more we can empathize, the more we can connect. And nobody is just their generation. We're all individuals, and that's okay. And we're super fascinating. We're still super fascinating. We are interesting people. That's what I find so fascinating. That's why I work with people. What can you say? All right. So whether you're a boomer or a millennial or a Gen Xer or a Gen Zer like me, a Gen Xer like me or a Gen Zer, I hope today's episode helped you see your generation and other generations in a new light. And I'm really excited to dig deeper into these issues in the Gen Mess with Tess and understand that the first step towards connection is understanding and empathy. All right. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.